The bathroom mirror showed a woman who had made a terrible mistake. Carolyn Whitmore gripped the edges of the porcelain, sink her knuckles whitening against the cold surface, and watched mascara trace dark rivers down cheeks that had stopped expecting kindness from strangers years ago. The fluorescent lights of Higgins' restaurant hummed overhead, indifferent to the quiet collapse happening beneath them, and somewhere beyond the bathroom door, the Saturday evening crowd continued their meals, their laughter, their lives untouched by what had just transpired at the table near the window. She had worn the green cardigan tonight, the one Nicole always said brought out her eyes. She had spent 40 minutes on her hair coaxing the auburn waves into something that looked effortless, and she had told herself that this time would be different. Spencer Caldwell had seemed promising in his profile photographs, his messages witty and warm, his interest in her work as a graphic designer appearing genuine across 3 weeks of digital conversation. The memory played behind her closed eyelids with cruel precision. His face when she approached the table, the way his smile had flickered, dimmed in the space between one heartbeat and the next. The mechanical motion of his eyes traveling from her face to her shoulders to her hips, cataloging disappointments like items on a grocery list he had no intention of purchasing. His words echoed in the tiled chamber. The photos on your profile must be from a few years back. She had tried to explain that the pictures were recent, taken just last month at Nicole's son's birthday party, but he had already made his assessment. His expression had shifted into something worse than disgust. Pity. The particular brand of pity reserved for people who did not understand their own limitations. I have certain standards, he had said, leaning back in his chair, with the casual cruelty of a man who believed his opinions constituted universal truth. My position requires a partner who fits the image. Clients notice these things. It is not personal, but it was personal. It was the most personal thing in the world. Carrie turned on the faucet and let cold water run over her wrists, an old trick her grandmother had taught her for calming panic. The chill spread up her forearms, grounding her in the present moment, reminding her that she was still here, still breathing, still capable of walking out of this bathroom and retrieving her coat and driving home to her apartment where Biscuit would be waiting on his favorite spot on the couch. 32 years old, a successful freelance designer with a portfolio that attracted steady work. An apartment she had decorated herself with colors that made her happy. A best friend who would answer the phone at any hour. A cat who purred when she came home. These were the things that defined her life, and yet somehow none of them seemed to matter when a man she had known for 15 minutes dismissed her entire existence because her body did not conform to his specifications. She dried her hands on a paper towel and studied her reflection with a detached assessment she usually reserved for client work that was not quite right. The mascara damage was fixable. The redness around her eyes would fade. The invisible wound beneath her sternum would scab over by morning, joining the collection of similar scars she had accumulated since adolescence, since her mother first suggested that perhaps she should skip dessert since her father walked out and never mentioned whether his new family included daughters who met his standards. Deep breath in, hold for 4 counts, release slowly. She straightened her cardigan, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and practiced the expression she would wear as she walked back through the dining room. Not hurt, not defeated, merely a woman who had changed her mind about dinner and was leaving of her own volition, owing nothing to anyone, requiring no one's permission or approval. The door opened and a stranger walked in, a woman in her 60s with silver earrings and kind eyes who smiled at Carrie without knowing anything about the last 20 minutes. That smile almost broke the fragile composure Carrie had constructed, because kindness from strangers was harder to bear than cruelty. Cruelty confirmed what she already believed about herself. Kindness suggested the possibility that she might be wrong, and hope was a dangerous thing for a woman who had learned to survive by keeping her expectations low. She slipped past the older woman and into the restaurant proper. Her gaze fixed on the coat check near the entrance, her peripheral vision deliberately blurred to avoid seeing whether anyone was watching her departure. Spencer had left money on the table when he walked out, she remembered. Enough to cover both their drinks and whatever food she might have ordered if she had stayed. Consolation money. Compensation for her wasted evening. She had not touched it. Her coat was heavier than she remembered, or perhaps her arms had grown weaker. She shrugged it on and pushed through the front door into the January night, the cold Portland air sharp against her still damp cheeks, and only then did she allow herself to feel the full weight of what had happened, not the humiliation, She could survive humiliation. She had been practicing for years. What crushed her was the confirmation. The evidence that Derek had been right when he ended their 5-year relationship with the observation that he needed someone he could bring to work events without feeling self-conscious. The proof that her mother's endless commentary about her weight had been protective rather than cruel, an attempt to prepare her for a world that would never accept her as she was. Her car was parked 3 blocks away, and she walked those blocks with her head down and her hands shoved deep into her pockets, passing storefronts that reflected her silhouette back at her in unflattering fragments. A woman alone on a Saturday night. A woman walking away from yet another failed attempt at connection. A woman who was beginning to wonder whether the common denominator in all her disappointments might be herself. The drive home passed in a blur of traffic lights and muscle memory. She parked in her usual spot, climbed the stairs to her third-floor apartment, and unlocked the door to find Biscuit exactly where she had left him, curled in the center of the couch with his marmalade fur catching the lamplight she had left on to discourage burglars. He opened one golden eye as she entered, assessed her condition with feline indifference, and closed it again. She envied his certainty, his complete lack of concern about whether the world found him acceptable, his unwavering belief that he deserved the warmth of the lamp and the softness of the cushion and the regular delivery of his favorite food. She hung her coat on the hook by the door and kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto the couch beside him, not bothering to change out of her dress or remove her ruined makeup. The ceiling above her was white and blank, offering no answers, demanding no explanations. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Nicole probably checking in after the date that was supposed to have lasted at least through dinner. Carrie ignored it. She would call tomorrow when she had constructed a version of the evening that was funny rather than devastating, when she could perform the role of the woman who found these experiences amusing rather than annihilating. Biscuit stretched and repositioned himself so that his head rested on her thigh, his purr vibrating through the fabric of her dress. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. She reached into her coat pocket for a tissue, and her fingers encountered something unexpected. Paper, stiff and rectangular like a business card. Confusion replaced despair for a moment as she pulled the card out and held it up to the lamplight. She had not given anyone her card tonight. She had not received any professional introductions. The only person she had spoken to was Spencer, and he had not seemed like the type to leave contact information for a woman he had just dismissed as beneath his standards. The front of the card was simple. Beckett Woodcraft, built to last. A phone number, a Portland address. No website, no social media handles, just the essential information in a plain font that suggested the owner valued function over flash. She turned the card over and found handwriting on the back. Neat and slightly slanted, the script of someone who used pens for practical purposes rather than artistic expression. If you need someone to listen without judging my daughter, and I have pizza night every Tuesday at Laurelhurst Park. 6 in the evening, nothing more than pizza and a little piece, Garrett. Carrie read the message 3 times before the words assembled into meaning. Someone had left this in her pocket. Someone had watched what happened with Spencer, had seen her flee to the bathroom, had decided to respond not with pity or scorn, but with an invitation. Pizza night, with a daughter. The absurdity of it struck her first. A stranger offering pizza in a park as a remedy for romantic humiliation. The potential dangers followed immediately afterward, years of warnings about men who seemed kind until they were not, echoing through her mind. But beneath the absurdity and the caution, something else stirred. Curiosity. The faint, dangerous flicker of interest in a world that had seemed entirely hostile an hour ago. She set the card on the coffee table and stared at it as though it might reveal additional information if she waited long enough. Beckett Woodcraft. A carpenter or furniture maker, presumably. Someone who worked with his hands, who created tangible objects, who probably had calluses and sawdust in his truck, and none of the polished veneer that Spencer had worn like armor. Biscuit lifted his head and regarded the card with the same suspicion Carrie felt. She scratched behind his ears and told herself she would throw the card away in the morning. She would forget about Garrett and his daughter, and their Tuesday ritual would return to her regularly scheduled life of client deadlines and solitary dinners, and the careful management of expectations that kept disappointment at bay. But she did not throw the card away. She left it on the coffee table when she finally dragged herself to bed, And it was the first thing she saw when she woke the next morning, and by the time she had finished her second cup of coffee, she had already opened her laptop and typed Beckett Woodcraft Portland into the search bar. The website was exactly what she had expected. Simple, functional featuring photographs of handcrafted furniture that looked like it belonged in museums rather than living rooms. Tables with grain patterns that told stories. Chairs that seemed to have grown from the floor rather than been assembled. Bookshelves that curved and flowed with an organic grace that suggested their creator understood wood the way surgeons understood bodies. The reviews were uniformly positive, spanning several years and multiple platforms. Garrett finished our dining table ahead of schedule, and it is the most beautiful piece of furniture we own. He rebuilt our kitchen cabinets after the flood, and they are better than the originals. A craftsman in the truest sense of the word. Not much for small talk, but his work speaks for itself. She found no photograph of the man himself on the business page, but the Facebook profile attached to the same name yielded results. The account had been dormant for 3 years, the last post dated to a January afternoon that had apparently marked the end of its owner's digital life. The image showed a hospital room bathed in afternoon light. A man with tired eyes and stubble on his jaw sat on the edge of a narrow bed, his arm around a woman who had no hair, and the kind of smile that suggested she knew exactly how little time she had left. Between them, a girl of perhaps 5 pressed her face against a stuffed bear and looked at the camera with an expression too old for her years. Last day of chemo for Laura. She is a warrior. We love her. Carrie scrolled down and found the condolences. The shock and grief and offers of casseroles that appeared in the comments of people who had lost someone before they were ready. The date of Laura's death was not mentioned directly, but the mathematics were simple enough. 3 years ago. The daughter would be 8 now, old enough for pizza night in the park, old enough to remember her mother, but young enough to need reminding. A widower, a single father, a man who had seen Carrie at her worst and responded with nothing but an invitation. She closed the laptop and stared out the window at the gray Portland morning. The sensible thing would be to delete her browser history and continue with her Sunday routine. Laundry, client emails, maybe a walk if the rain held off. The sensible thing would be to protect herself from the inevitable disappointment of discovering that Garrett Beckett was not as kind as his note suggested, that there was a catch somewhere, that nobody offered pizza to crying strangers without expecting something in return. But Carrie had been sensible her entire life, and sensible had not prevented Spencer from sitting across from her at a restaurant table and explaining that she was not good enough to be seen in public with. Sensible had not protected her from Derek or her mother, or the endless parade of small cruelties that accumulated like silt, until she could barely remember what it felt like to breathe freely. Tuesday, 6 in the evening, Laurelhurst Park. She would not go. Of course she would not go, but the cards stayed on the coffee table, and every time she passed it, she found herself reading the words again. Monday arrived with a backlog of client requests and a deadline for a logo redesign that consumed most of her attention. She worked from her home office, a corner of her living room that she had transformed into a functional space with good lighting and an ergonomic chair, and by evening she had completed 3 projects and only thought about the business cards 17 times. Nicole called at 8, and Carrie spent 20 minutes constructing a sanitized version of Saturday's disaster that emphasized Spencer's superficiality rather than her own humiliation. She did not mention the card. She was not sure why, except that speaking about it would make it real, would force her to decide what she intended to do, and she preferred to leave that decision in the comfortable limbo of postponement. Tuesday morning, she woke with the word pizza echoing in her mind and immediately told herself that she was not going anywhere except her desk. She had work to do. She had bills to pay. She had a perfectly satisfactory life that did not require the intervention of strangers with daughters and grief and handwritten invitations. By 2 in the afternoon, she had changed her mind. By 3, she had changed it back. By 4, she was standing in front of her closet trying to decide what a person wore to a casual pizza gathering in a public park with a widower, and his child, assuming that person was not attempting to impress anyone, but merely wished to appear like a functioning adult who had not spent the weekend crying into her cat's fur. Jeans. The comfortable ones that did not pinch at the waist. A gray cardigan over a simple white shirt. Sneakers that had seen better days but could handle park terrain. No jewelry. No makeup beyond the bare minimum required to look like she had made an effort. She was not going on a date. She was going to see whether a strange man's kindness was genuine or whether the universe was preparing another lesson in the dangers of hope. The drive to Laurelhurst Park took 15 minutes, and she spent most of it listing reasons to turn around. He probably would not be there. He had probably forgotten he left the card. He was probably a serial killer who preyed on vulnerable women and their foolish trust in handwritten notes. By the time she parked her car and stepped onto the wet grass, she had convinced herself that the entire venture was a mistake and she should leave immediately. Then she saw them. A man and a child sitting on a wooden bench near a cluster of maple trees. The man matched the Facebook photograph but looked less exhausted, his brown hair showing strands of gray at the temples, his shoulders broad beneath a plaid flannel shirt. The girl had lighter hair, almost auburn in the fading afternoon light, and she was gesturing with both hands while telling a story that required her entire body to convey. On the bench between them sat a pizza box, open steam rising into the January air. Carrie stopped walking. The sensible part of her brain screamed retreat, and she was on the verge of obeying when the girl looked up and spotted her across the grass. A small hand pointed in Carrie's direction. Words too distant to hear. The man turned and his eyes found hers, and something in his expression shifted from surprise to recognition to what might have been relief. He raised one hand in a wave, not summoning her, not demanding, simply acknowledging her presence and leaving the next move to her. She thought about Spencer, about Derek, about her mother's endless cataloging of her physical deficiencies. She thought about all the times she had protected herself by staying home, staying silent, staying invisible. Then she walked across the grass toward the bench, where a stranger waited with pizza and a daughter and absolutely no expectations. His voice was deeper than she had imagined, steady without being loud. "You came." She stopped a few feet from the bench, close enough to see the lines around his eyes and the calluses on his hands. "I found your card," the girl interrupted before he could respond, her words tumbling out with the urgency of someone who had been waiting for something interesting to happen. "Are you the lady from the restaurant? Dad said you might come, but I said probably not, because who goes to parks to meet strangers? But Dad said sometimes people need a place to go, where nobody expects anything, and I said that sounds like school," and he laughed. Carrie found herself smiling despite the anxiety knotting her stomach. The girl's energy was infectious, her honesty disarming. "I am Carrie. I am Rosie." The girl patted the bench beside her. "Sit down. We have pepperoni and cheese because I do not like spicy things, even though Dad says I should try new foods, but I think new foods are overrated." Garrett shifted to make room on the bench, and Carrie lowered herself onto the wooden slats, acutely aware of how close she was to people she did not know how far she had ventured from the safety of her apartment and her routines. The pizza smelled like childhood, like birthday parties and sleepovers and all the simple pleasures that adulthood had complicated. "Thank you for the card," she said, directing the words at Garrett, because looking at him was easier than looking at Rosie, whose openness felt like a mirror reflecting everything Carrie had learned to hide. "I was not sure if you would actually be here." "We are here every Tuesday," Rosie answered before her father could. "It is tradition. Mom started it when I was little, and now Dad and I keep it going because traditions are important." That is what Mom said. Traditions help you remember who you are when everything else gets confusing. The mention of the mother landed like a small stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Garrett's face tightened almost imperceptibly, and Carrie felt the weight of what this family had lost, how their Tuesday ritual was not just pizza, but a memorial, a way of keeping someone present who was no longer there. "Your mom sounds wise," she said carefully. Rosie nodded with the solemnity of someone much older. "She was. She is. She watches us from heaven," Dad says. I tell her about my week when I draw pictures of her. The words should have been awkward, perhaps, or uncomfortable. Instead, they felt like a gift. This child who had lost her mother before she was old enough to remember everything, who carried that loss with neither shame nor self-pity, who spoke of heaven in drawings and weekly reports with the matter-of-fact acceptance that adults spent decades trying to recover. Carrie accepted a slice of pizza from the box and took a bite that tasted better than any food she could remember eating. The cheese stretched in the way that good cheese always did, and the crust was thin and crispy, and the pepperoni had just enough grease to feel indulgent without being overwhelming. "This is good pizza," Rosie beamed. "We go to Enzo's. Dad knows the owner because he built their counter 3 years ago, and now we get extra cheese for free." The conversation continued in that pattern for the next hour. Rosie filling most of the silences with observations about school, about her hamster named Nugget, about the book she was reading, where a spider saved a pig and everyone cried at the end. Garrett contributed occasionally short sentences that added context or gentle corrections when Rosie's enthusiasm outpaced her accuracy, but mostly he listened, his attention divided between his daughter and the stranger who had appeared at their Tuesday sanctuary. Carrie learned that Rosie was in third grade and hated math but loved art, that she had a best friend named Clover whose real name was Clara, but who preferred flowers to regular words, that she had never been to Disneyland but hoped to go someday, maybe when she was 10, maybe when Dad finished the big project he was working on. She learned that Garrett rarely spoke about himself unless directly asked, and even then his answers were brief. He had been a carpenter for 15 years. He worked mostly on custom furniture, now taking commissions from people who wanted something that would last, something with character. His brother Wade owned an auto shop on the east side. His wife had been a teacher before she got sick. The sun was setting by the time the pizza was finished, the January sky shifting from gray to pink to purple in the way that Portland sunsets often did when the clouds cooperated. Rosie yawned and leaned against her father's arm, the energy that had powered her monologue finally depleted. "We should get you home," Garrett said, his voice soft. "School tomorrow." Rosie protested without conviction, the yawns increasing in frequency. Before she could formulate a coherent argument for staying, she turned to Carrie with an expression of sudden concern. "You are coming back next week, right?" The question landed with unexpected force. Carrie had not allowed herself to think about next week, had focused entirely on surviving the present moment without humiliation. But Rosie was looking at her with eyes that expected an answer, and Garrett was looking at her with eyes that expected nothing, and somehow that combination made the decision easier. "I would like that," Rosie grinned. "Good, I will bring my sketchbook. You can see my drawings. I am getting better at horses. They used to look like dogs, but now they look like horses with weird legs." They stood and gathered the empty pizza box and the napkins that had escaped into the grass. The walk back to the parking lot was quiet, Rosie holding her father's hand and occasionally glancing back to make sure Carrie was still following. At the edge of the grass, where the path split toward different sections of the lot, Garrett stopped and turned. "Thank you for coming." His words were simple, unadorned. "I was not sure if you would." "I was not sure either," Carrie admitted. "But I am glad I did." Rosie waved with both hands as they parted ways, her fatigue temporarily forgotten in the enthusiasm of farewell. "See you Tuesday, Carrie. Do not forget." Carrie watched them walk toward a pickup truck that had seen better decades, Rosie skipping ahead and then doubling back to take her father's hand again. Something in her chest loosened a tension she had not realized she was carrying, and when she finally turned toward her own car, she found that her steps were lighter than they had been in months. The drive home passed quickly, the streets of Portland familiar and unremarkable, and when she unlocked her apartment door and found Biscuit waiting with the patient expectation of a cat who knew his dinner was overdue, she realized that she had not thought about Spencer once since sitting down on that park bench. She fed the cat and changed into comfortable clothes and sat on the couch with her laptop intending to check her email, but instead opening a new document and staring at the blank page. Words wanted to come, impressions and images from the evening, but she did not know how to arrange them into sentences that would make sense to anyone who had not been there. A widower and his daughter. Pizza in a park. A child who talked about her dead mother with the same casual honesty that other children talked about their pets. A man who had left a business card in a stranger's pocket because he recognized pain when he saw it. The week that followed passed in a haze of work and distraction. Carrie completed projects and answered emails and had lunch with Nicole without mentioning Garrett or Rosie or the improbable Tuesday that had somehow rearranged her understanding of how strangers could interact. She told herself that she was not counting the days until the next pizza night, that her life did not revolve around a single hour in a public park with people she barely knew. But when Tuesday arrived, she was ready by 4 and at the park by 5:30, arriving early for the first time in her adult memory, sitting on a bench near the maple trees and watching the entrance for signs of a pickup truck that had seen better decades. They arrived at exactly 6, Rosie bounding across the grass before the truck had fully stopped. Garrett following with the pizza box in the same unhurried pace that seemed to characterize everything he did. Rosie carried a sketchbook under her arm and a purple backpack on her shoulders, and her greeting echoed across the park. "You came back." The words were jubilant, as though Carrie's presence confirmed something the girl had hoped but not quite believed. "I told Dad you would. I told him you liked us." Garrett set the pizza box on the bench and met Carrie's eyes with an expression that might have been gratitude. She brought her homework. Apparently pizza night is now also math help night. "I hate fractions," Rosie announced, settling onto the bench with the sketchbook in her lap. "Who invented fractions? I want to write them a letter." "A mean letter." Carrie laughed and the sound surprised her, genuine rather than performed. "I felt the same way about fractions when I was your age." The evening unfolded with the same rhythm as the week before. Rosie's chatter, filling the spaces between bites of pizza, Garrett contributing occasional observations, Carrie finding herself more comfortable with each passing minute. At some point, she ended up with the sketchbook in her hands, flipping through pages of drawings that range from crude to surprisingly sophisticated. "This one is Mom." Rosie pointed to a figure with yellow crayon hair and a dress made of flowers. "I draw her every week, so I do not forget what she looks like." The drawing was simple, almost abstract, but something about the curve of the smile and the angle of the head suggested that Rosie had captured more than just physical features. "She is beautiful." She was. Rosie's voice held no sadness, only certainty. "Dad has pictures, but pictures do not move. When I draw her, I can make her do things. See, here she is planting flowers. Here she is reading me a story. Here she is making pancakes." The pages turned, revealing a visual diary of a woman who no longer existed except in memory and crayon. Carrie felt her throat tighten and looked up to find Garrett watching her, his expression unreadable. "She had a lot of talents," he said quietly. "Art was one of them." The conversation shifted after that, moving towards safer topics, and by the time the pizza was finished and Rosie's yawns had returned, Carrie felt as though she had known these people for much longer than 2 Tuesday evenings. There was something about their company that required no performance, no careful management of impressions. They accepted her presence without commentary, included her without interrogation, and when they parted ways at the edge of the parking lot, Rosie's farewell hug was tight enough to leave the scent of her strawberry shampoo on Carrie's cardigan. The pattern continued through February. Each Tuesday, Carrie arrived at the park and found Garrett and Rosie waiting with the pizza and whatever stories the week had generated. Each Tuesday, she learned something new about them, small details that accumulated into something resembling knowledge, perhaps even friendship. She learned that Garrett had inherited his love of woodworking from his father, who had learned it from his father, 3 generations of men who understood that patience and precision could transform raw materials into objects that outlasted the hands that shaped them. She learned that Laura had been an elementary school teacher who specialized in reading, who believed that every child could learn to love books if given the right story at the right moment. She learned that Rosie slept with a scarf her mother had been knitting when she died, unfinished and imperfect and irreplaceable. She told them things too gradually in fragments that did not feel like confessions. Her work as a graphic designer. Her cat named Biscuit, who judged her life choices from his throne on the couch. Her friend Nicole, who had been trying to set her up on dates for years with steadily diminishing enthusiasm. What she did not tell them was why she had been crying in the restaurant bathroom that first night. What Spencer had said. How many times similar words had been spoken by different men, different women, different versions of the same message. They did not ask, and she did not volunteer, and the omission created a small pocket of privacy within the growing intimacy of their Tuesday gatherings. The third week brought rain, and they moved to the pavilion near the playground, huddling on benches beneath a roof that leaked in strategic places. Rosie produced a deck of cards from her backpack and taught Carrie a game that involved slapping and shouting and accusations of cheating that were leveled with gleeful abandon. "You are letting her win," Garrett observed during a lull in the competition. Carrie grinned. "She is 8 and also terrifying." "I am not terrifying." Rosie slapped another card triumphantly. "I am strategic." The fourth week, Carrie brought cupcakes from a bakery near her apartment, chocolate with cream cheese frosting, and Rosie's reaction suggested that this was the greatest gift anyone had ever bestowed upon humanity. They ate pizza and cupcakes, and Rosie declared that Carrie was now officially a friend rather than a stranger, a distinction that apparently carried significant weight in the social hierarchy of third grade. "Friends come to your house," Rosie explained through a mouthful of frosting. Strangers just stay in parks. When is Carrie coming to our house, Dad? Garrett looked at Carrie with something like apology in his eyes. She does not have to. But I want to see her house. Rosie was not easily deterred. I want to see where she makes her designs. Do you have a fancy computer? Dad does not have a computer. He does everything with paper and pencils because he says screens give him headaches. I have a computer, Carrie confirmed, but it is not very fancy. The conversation moved on, but the question lingered, and when the evening ended and they walked to the parking lot in the darkness of early March, Garrett hung back while Rosie ran ahead to the truck. You do not have to come to the house. His voice was low private. She gets ideas and runs with them. Carrie hesitated. Would it be strange if I wanted to? A pause. His face was difficult to read in the dim light of the street lamps. It would not be strange. It would be welcome. But only if you want to. She thought about the question on the drive home, turning it over like a stone in her pocket. The park had felt safe, public non-committal. Going to his house would be something else. A step further into a relationship that she still did not know how to categorize. But when Saturday arrived and her phone buzzed with a message from an unfamiliar number, she found herself saying yes before she had time to construct objections. Rosie wants to show you her room. No pressure. Bring biscuit if you want. She did not bring biscuit, but she did bring a bottle of wine that she immediately regretted, uncertain whether wine was appropriate for a visit that included an 8-year-old. Garrett accepted it without comment, setting it on the kitchen counter, while Rosie dragged Carrie through the house at a speed that made detailed observation impossible. This is the living room. That is Dad's chair. Nobody sits there except Dad. This is the kitchen. Dad cooks really good pasta. This is my room. See the purple walls. I picked purple because it is the color of royalty, and I am basically a princess. The room was small and cluttered in the way of children's rooms, stuffed animals competing for space with books and art supplies. The walls were indeed purple, a shade that managed to be both vivid and somehow calming. On the dresser sat a framed photograph of a woman with light brown hair and a smile that matched the drawings in Rosie's sketchbook. That is Mom. Rosie's voice did not change, did not soften or crack. She was the best mom. She made pancakes on Sundays, and she read me stories every night, and she said I was perfect exactly how I am. Carrie looked at the photograph, at the woman who had left behind a daughter and a husband and a scarf that would never be finished. She sounds wonderful. She was. Rosie turned and headed for the door. Come on, I want to show you Dad's workshop. The workshop occupied what had once been a garage, the concrete floor covered with sawdust, and the walls lined with tools that Carrie could not name. In the center of the space, a table was taking shape, its surface smooth and its legs still rough. The smell of wood was overwhelming, organic, and alive. This is where Dad makes things. Rosie ran her hand along the edge of the unfinished table. He says every piece of wood has a story. You just have to listen until it tells you what it wants to be. Garrett appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. She is quoting me. Badly. I am quoting you perfectly. Rosie stuck out her tongue. You said the wood talks to you. I said you have to understand what the material wants. It is not literal. Carrie wandered deeper into the workshop, studying the tools and the projects in various stages of completion. A bookshelf with curved sides that seemed to flow like water. A jewelry box with an inlaid pattern of leaves. A child-sized chair painted bright red. You made all of this over the years. Garrett joined her near the bookshelf. This one is for a client in Lake Oswego. The box is for my brother's wife's birthday next month. It is beautiful. The word felt inadequate. The work was more than beautiful. It was careful, intentional. Every joint and curve the product of deliberate choices and patient execution. Thank you. His voice was quiet, not fishing for compliments, but genuinely grateful. Most people want things fast and cheap. Finding clients who appreciate craftsmanship is getting harder. Rosie had grown bored with the adult conversation and was drawing patterns in the sawdust with her shoe. Dad, can we show Carrie the box? Garrett hesitated. Which box? Mom's box. The silence that followed was heavy with something Carrie did not fully understand. She watched Garrett's face, watched the struggle between reluctance and the desire to honor his daughter's request. Only if Carrie wants to see it. Carrie nodded, uncertain what she was agreeing to, but unwilling to refuse. Garrett moved to a cabinet in the corner and returned with a wooden box the size of a shoebox, its lid carved with an intricate pattern of flowering vines. He set it on the workbench and stepped back, allowing Rosie to take over. Dad made this for Mom, their anniversary. She kept her special things inside. Rosie opened the lid with the reverence of a museum curator handling artifacts. Inside, nestled against velvet lining, lay a collection of objects that meant nothing to Carrie, but clearly meant everything to the family. A wedding ring, a hospital bracelet, a folded piece of paper, a small vial of perfume, a lock of hair tied with blue ribbon. This is the letter. Rosie pointed to the folded paper but did not touch it. Mom wrote it before she died. For Dad, he has not read it yet. Carrie looked at Garrett, whose face had gone carefully neutral. The letter Laura wrote it during her last week. He spoke slowly, choosing each word. She told me to read it when I was ready to move forward. I have not been ready. The admission hung in the air, raw and private, and Carrie understood suddenly why he had hesitated to show her the box. This was not a museum exhibit. This was a wound still healing, still tender to the touch. She kept the letter all this time. Her voice was soft. That is love, wanting to help someone even after you are gone. Garrett met her eyes and something passed between them that Carrie could not name. A recognition, perhaps. An acknowledgement that they had both known loss, both carried scars that did not show on the surface. Rosie closed the box with gentle hands. Mom was smart. She knew Dad would need time. The evening continued after that dinner in the small kitchen conversation that carefully avoided the territories they had accidentally crossed into. But when Carrie drove home through the dark Portland streets, she found that the image of the wooden box stayed with her, the carved vines and the folded letter, and the man who had not been ready to read what his wife had wanted him to know. The following Tuesday, she arrived at the park with questions she did not ask and thought she did not share. Rosie chattered as usual, oblivious to the subtle shift in atmosphere, but Garrett seemed to sense something different. His eyes lingered on Carrie's face longer than usual, and when Rosie ran off to play on the swings, he spoke. I hope we did not overwhelm you. The box. The letter. Rosie does not always understand boundaries. Carrie shook her head. She did not overwhelm me. She showed me something important about your family. I am grateful. A pause. The sound of Rosie laughing on the swings carried across the grass. You are the first person outside the family who has seen that box. His voice was barely above a whisper. It felt right to show you. I am not sure why. Maybe because I understand what it means to carry things you are not ready to share. He looked at her, then really looked, and Carrie felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. She did not flinch. She did not look away. What happened at the restaurant that night? The question was gentle, not demanding. You do not have to tell me. She considered deflecting, offering a vague answer that would close the subject. But he had shown her the box. He had trusted her with the letter. The least she could do was trust him with the truth. A man told me I was not good enough to be seen in public with. She forced the words out, each one scraping against the wall she had built. He looked at me and decided I was not worth his time because of how I look. It was not the first time someone has said something like that. Garrett was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat with controlled anger. He was wrong, I know. The words came easier now. I mean, I know it intellectually. Knowing it here is harder. She touched her chest. It takes longer for that part to catch up. My wife said something once. Garrett's eyes were on the horizon, but his words were for Carrie. She said that the people who make you feel small are always the ones who are small themselves. They cannot grow, so they try to shrink everyone around them. Carrie let the words settle. Laura sounds like someone I would have liked. You would have. He smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from him. She would have liked you too. She had a talent for seeing people clearly, past all the masks they wore. Rosie returned from the swings breathless and muddy, and the conversation shifted back to lighter topics. But something had changed. A door had opened barely, and neither of them had slammed it shut. March arrived with warmer weather and longer evenings, and the Tuesday rituals expanded. Carrie started coming to the house on Saturdays, helping Rosie with art projects, while Garrett worked in the workshop. She learned to distinguish between different types of wood by smell and texture. She listened to Rosie read aloud from her current book and offered encouragement when fractions proved especially frustrating. Nicole noticed the change. "You seem happier," she said during one of their lunch dates. "Less hunched." "I do not hunch. You did. Like you were trying to take up less space. Now you walk like someone who belongs wherever she is." Carrie did not know how to explain what had changed because she was not sure herself. The Tuesday gatherings and Saturday visits had become fixtures in her week landmarks she navigated toward. Garrett and Rosie had become people she thought about when they were not present, wondered about, looked forward to seeing. It was not romance. She reminded herself of this frequently. A widower with a young daughter was not looking for complications. A woman who had been told repeatedly that she was not good enough was not equipped for the vulnerabilities that romance required. They were friends, perhaps on the way to being something deeper, but still safely in the territory of mutual respect and shared pizza. The last Tuesday of March brought a storm that kept them indoors, gathered in Garrett's living room with delivery pizza because the park was a lake. Rosie fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie, her head in her father's lap, and the adults found themselves talking in the hushed voices that sleeping children required. She mentioned something at school. Garrett's voice was troubled. About some kids saying things. She would not tell me the details. "What kind of things I do not know?" He smoothed Rosie's hair back from her forehead. She changes the subject when I ask. Pretends everything is fine. Carrie watched the sleeping child, remembering the way Rosie avoided talking about friends, the way she sometimes fell silent when school came up. "I noticed that too. She is good at redirecting." "Too good." He sighed. "I worry that she is protecting me, trying not to add to my burdens. Children do that, especially children who have lost a parent. They become little caretakers." Garrett looked at her. "That sounds like experience talking." Carrie shrugged. "My father left when I was 12. I spent years trying to be perfect so my mother would not leave too. It did not work, but I got very good at hiding my problems. The parallel was not lost on either of them. Two people who had learned early that vulnerability was dangerous, that showing cracks invited further breaking. Two people who had built walls and were only now beginning to recognize the walls in each other. "What happened with your mother?" She stayed. Carrie's voice was careful, but she never stopped criticizing. Never stopped pointing out all the ways I fell short. "I think she believed she was helping." And the father remarried. New family. Holiday cards with photos of children who looked nothing like me. She paused. "I used to wonder what I did wrong, what made him leave. Eventually I realized it was not about me. He was just a person who could not handle difficulty. When things got hard, he walked away. That must have hurt. It did. Still does sometimes. But it taught me something too." "What?" She looked at him, at his tired eyes and gentle hands, and the daughter sleeping in his lap. "That the people who stay are the ones who matter. The ones who leave were never really yours to begin with." The words settled between them like something precious and fragile. Garrett did not respond immediately, but his expression shifted, softened, and Carrie felt the strange sensation of being truly seen by someone who was not looking for flaws. "You matter," he said finally. "I hope you know that. To Rosie, to this family, to me." Her heart stuttered. She did not know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. "You matter too." Rosie stirred, mumbled something about horses, and settled back into sleep. The moment passed, but the words remained suspended in the air like dust motes in lamplight. Carrie drove home that night with her hands trembling on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from the overwhelming sensation of standing at the edge of something she had not expected to find, looking down into depths she was not sure she was ready to explore. The business card still sat on her coffee table, worn at the edges from handling. She picked it up and read the words for the 100th time. "If you need someone to listen without judging." Garrett had kept that promise. Week after week, he had listened without judgment, had offered space without demanding anything in return. He had shown her his wounds and accepted hers, and somehow in the process something had begun to heal. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if the door they had opened would lead anywhere or if it would eventually close under the weight of old fears and learned protections. But for the first time in years, she wanted to find out. And somewhere in a workshop that smelled of sawdust and patience, a man sat beside a wooden box and finally pulled out a folded letter, and the first line read, "When you are ready to love again, do not be afraid." April arrived with cherry blossoms along the streets of Portland and a shift in the architecture of Carrie's weeks. The Tuesday pizza nights had become scaffolding, but now new structures were rising around them. Sunday brunches at the house on Maple Street, Wednesday evening phone calls that started as check-ins and stretched into hours. Saturday afternoons in the workshop where Carrie learned to sand with the grain and Rosie practiced her increasingly ambitious drawings. The letter from Laura sat in Garrett's workshop, now tucked into a drawer beneath his sketches and measurements. He had not told Carrie what it said, not in detail, but his demeanor had changed in the weeks since he read it. Something in his posture had relaxed, some tension in his jaw had released, as though permission had been granted for something he had not allowed himself to want. Carrie noticed the change in small ways. How his eyes lingered on her face during conversations. How his hand occasionally brushed her shoulder when he passed behind her chair. How he said her name differently, with a weight it had not carried before. She noticed, and she did not run. The brunch tradition began accidentally born from a rainy Sunday when Rosie called Carrie to complain about boredom and Garrett's inability to make proper French toast. Carrie arrived with groceries and a recipe from her grandmother, and by noon the kitchen smelled like cinnamon, and the living room rang with Rosie's laughter as she tried to teach biscuit tricks through a video call. After that, Sundays became part of the pattern. Carrie would arrive by 9 with ingredients for whatever she had decided to cook, and Garrett would hand her coffee made exactly the way she liked it, and Rosie would appear in pajamas with her hair tangled and her questions endless. They would eat together at the kitchen table, and then the day would unfold without agenda. Walks in the neighborhood or movies on the couch or quiet hours where each person pursued their own activities in companionable proximity. It was during one of these quiet Sundays that Carrie first noticed the long sleeves. May had brought warmth to Portland, temperatures climbing into the 70s, and yet Rosie refused to change out of her hoodie. Carrie watched the girl draw at the kitchen table, sweat beading at her temples, and asked if she wanted something cooler to wear. Rosie's response was quick, too quick. "I am fine. I like this hoodie. Mom gave it to me." The mention of Laura ended the conversation as Rosie had likely intended. But Carrie filed the observation away, adding it to the growing collection of inconsistencies she had noticed. The long sleeves, the reluctance to discuss friends, the way Rosie sometimes flinched when her phone buzzed with messages. She mentioned her concerns to Garrett that evening after Rosie had gone to bed, and the adults sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. His face darkened. "I have noticed too. She says everything is fine, but she is not sleeping well. I hear her moving around at night. Have you talked to her teacher? I called last week. The teacher said Rosie seems happy, in class, participates well, no obvious problems." He drained his wine glass. But teachers do not see everything. The conversation ended without resolution, both of them aware that children kept secrets and that forcing disclosure often drove them deeper underground. But Carrie could not stop thinking about the hoodie, about the flinch, about the gap between the Rosie who performed happiness and the Rosie who might be suffering behind the performance. The answer came 2 weeks later in the cruelest possible way. Garrett had a meeting with a client in Lake Oswego, one of those afternoon consultations that could stretch for hours. He asked Carrie if she could pick Rosie up from school, a request that sent a flutter through her chest because it meant something being trusted with this responsibility being woven further into the fabric of their family. She arrived at the elementary school 15 minutes early, parking near the pickup zone, and watching other parents gather in clusters. The final bell rang, and children poured out backpacks, bouncing voices high with the relief of freedom. Rosie was not among them. Carrie waited. 5 minutes, 10. The crowd thinned, and the clusters dispersed, and still no sign of auburn hair in a too-warm hoodie. She was about to go inside and ask when she heard the voices. They came from the side of the building near the dumpsters where the older kids sometimes gathered. 3 distinct tones, high and mocking, punctuated by a fourth that Carrie recognized with a lurch of her stomach. Rosie Rotund, Rosie Rotund, round like a ball and dumb like a rock. Carrie's legs moved before her mind caught up. She rounded the corner and found them 3 boys circling Rosie like wolves around a wounded animal. The girl stood with her back against the brick wall, arms wrapped around her midsection, face carefully blank, in the way that children learned when showing emotion made things worse. One of the boys was chanting, "Your mom died because she did not want to live with a fatty like you." Carrie's vision went red at the edges. Her voice emerged cold and sharp, cutting through the cruelty like a blade. "What did you just say?" The boys turned. Their faces registered surprise, then defiance, then something approaching fear as they registered the expression on Carrie's face. "We were just playing." The tallest one tried for innocence. "Right, Rosie? We were just playing." Carrie stepped closer. She was trembling, but not with fear. Does playing usually involve three people cornering one person and saying vicious things about her dead mother's silence? She lowered herself to their eye level, and when she spoke, her voice was steady, despite the rage burning in her chest. "I know your faces. I know your names because Rosie has mentioned you before. And I want you to understand something very clearly. What you are doing is not playing. It is bullying. It is cruel. And it stops today." The smallest boy's lip trembled. "We did not mean anything." Meaning something and doing something are not the same thing. Carrie did not blink. Rosie's mother died of cancer. She was sick and she fought hard and she loved her daughter more than anything in the world. If I ever hear that you have said another word about her or about Rosie or about anyone's family, I will speak to your parents and your principal and anyone else who will listen. Do you understand? Nods, shuffling feet, eyes that would not meet hers. Go home. Now. They scattered like startled birds, and then it was just Carrie and Rosie standing in the shadow of the school building, the afternoon sun slanting through the trees. Rosie's composure crumbled. She pressed her face against Carrie's stomach and sobbed great heaving sounds that seemed too large for her small body, and Carrie held her and stroked her hair and felt her own tears falling into the auburn strands. "How long?" Her voice was gentle now, all the anger redirected at targets that had fled. "How long has this been happening?" Rosie's answer came in fragments muffled against Carrie's shirt. "Since September, when I started third grade. They said I was fat, and then they found out about Mom and it got worse. 6 months. The girl had carried this alone for 6 months, protecting her father from additional burden, swallowing the poison rather than letting it contaminate the household that had already suffered enough. Carrie thought about her own childhood, about the years of her mother's commentary, and the decades it had taken to understand that the criticism was not truth, but projection. She thought about the walls she had built and the damage those walls had failed to prevent, and she made a decision. She pulled back and cupped Rosie's face in her hands, wiping tears with her thumbs. "Listen to me. What those boys said is wrong, every word of it. Your mother did not die because of anything you did or anything you are. She died because she was sick, and sometimes sick people do not get better no matter how much we love them or how hard they fight." Rosie's eyes were red and swimming. "But they said things that hurt because hurting people made them feel powerful." Carrie kept her voice steady. "But their words do not define you. Being bigger or smaller or different does not make you worth less than anyone else. Sad does not mean weak. Sad is just sad, and you are allowed to feel it without being broken by it." The words seemed to land somewhere deep, and Rosie's sobbing gradually quieted into hiccups and sniffles. Carrie held her until the trembling stopped, and then they walked to the car together. Hands linked, something irrevocably changed between them. Garrett's reaction to the news was a contained storm. Carrie watched him pace the living room, while Rosie sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, watched his hands clench and unclench, watched the muscles in his jaw work as he processed what his daughter had endured in silence. 6 months. His voice was rough. "You went through this for 6 months, and you did not tell me." Rosie pulled the blanket tighter. "I did not want you to be sad. You were already sad about Mom." The statement broke something in him. He crossed the room and knelt before the couch, gathering his daughter into his arms. "Being sad about Mom is my job. Taking care of you is my job. You are not supposed to protect me. I am supposed to protect you. But I am okay." Rosie's voice was muffled against his shoulder. Carrie stopped them. "They will not do it anymore." Garrett looked up at Carrie over his daughter's head, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost unbearable in its intensity. "Thank you," the look said. "Thank you for seeing what I missed. Thank you for standing between her and the cruelty of the world." The school responded to their meeting with appropriate concern and insufficient action. Counseling was offered. The boys were spoken to. Assurances were made that the situation would be monitored. But Carrie knew from experience that systems designed to protect children often failed them in the spaces between official observations. So she made herself available. She picked Rosie up from school twice a week, her presence alone enough to deter the circling wolves. She texted the girl each morning with encouragements and each evening with questions about her day. She became a buffer, a witness, a reminder that someone was watching and someone would act. The summer that followed was a reprieve. School ended and the bullies dispersed to camps and vacations, leaving Rosie free to be a child again, without the daily gauntlet of cruelty. She spent hours in Carrie's apartment, learning to use design software and creating elaborate digital drawings that she proudly presented to anyone who would look. Carrie found a drawer in her bedroom and filled it with Rosie's art supplies, markers and colored pencils, and the special paper that Rosie preferred for her detailed work. The drawer represented something neither of them named aloud, a claim staked on space and time, a declaration that this relationship had a future. Garrett noticed the drawer during one of his visits to repair a leaking faucet. He stood in the bedroom doorway looking at the evidence of his daughter's presence in this woman's life, and his expression was complicated. "She has a place here now." Carrie nodded. "Is that okay?" He turned to face her. "More than okay. It means she feels safe with you. She does not give that easily. Neither do you." No, his eyes held hers. "Neither do I." The admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to explore. Then the faucet dripped loudly from the bathroom, breaking the moment, and they returned to the practical business of washers and wrenches and the comfortable labor of fixing things. July brought heat and a project that Carrie had been chasing for months. Pacific Northwest Grill, a restaurant chain expanding across Oregon and Washington, needed complete brand redesign. Logo, menus, signage, uniforms, all of it. The contract was worth $50,000 more than she had ever earned from a single client, and landing it felt like validation of everything she had struggled to build. She threw herself into the work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Concepts and revisions and color palette, as filled her days and her evenings, were consumed by the endless refinement of details that clients never consciously noticed, but would feel instinctively if they were wrong. Garrett and Rosie became her anchors during this period, the Tuesday rituals and Sunday brunches, pulling her back from the brink of burnout. She would arrive at the park with her laptop, stealing moments between pizza slices to tweak a font or adjust a spacing, and Rosie would peer over her shoulder and offer opinions that were surprisingly astute for an 8-year-old. "That green is too bright. It makes my eyes tired." Carrie adjusted the saturation and showed her again. "Better, better. Now it looks like trees instead of radioactive slime." The project progressed smoothly until August, when Carrie's laptop began behaving strangely. Programs crashed without warning, files saved incorrectly, and then one morning 3 weeks before the final deadline, she opened her project folder and found it empty. 3 months of work, hundreds of hours, gone. The panic that followed was absolute and consuming. She checked backups and found them corrupted. She searched cloud storage and found only fragments. She called her IT support contact and received the verdict she had dreaded: someone had deliberately accessed her system and deleted the files. Kirk Pennington. The name surfaced from her memory like a body rising from deep water. A fellow designer she had worked with on a collaborative project 2 years earlier, a man whose resentment of her success had been obvious in every interaction. He had made comments about her getting work that should have gone to more qualified people, had implied that her clients were lowering their standards. She had no proof, nothing that would hold up in court or even in conversation. But she knew. The call to Garrett was tearful and desperate, words tumbling out between sobs as she explained what had happened and what it meant. The deadline was impossible now. The contract would be lost. The reputation she had built would be destroyed by this single catastrophe. He listened without interrupting. When she finally ran out of words, his voice was calm. "My brother's son, Danny, studies computer science at Portland State. He is good at recovering things that seem lost. Can I bring him over?" She agreed because she had no other options. Danny arrived that evening, a 20-year-old with glasses and a quiet confidence that belied his youth. He examined her laptop with the focused intensity of a surgeon, tapping keys and running programs, and occasionally muttering to himself in technical language she could not follow. 3 hours later, he looked up with a tired smile. "Good news and bad news." Carrie braced herself. "Bad news first. Your system was definitely compromised. Someone installed a remote access tool and used it to delete your files." He pulled up a log on the screen. "I can see the access patterns. They knew what they were looking for. And the good news, they were not as thorough as they thought." He navigated to a folder she had not known existed. Your design software creates automatic backup fragments during saves. It is a recovery feature most people do not know about. I was able to reconstruct about 80% of your project files. 80%, not everything, but enough. Enough to salvage the deadline, to preserve the contract, to prevent the catastrophe she had been imagining. She cried again, but these were different tears. Garrett stayed with her that night, helping her sort through the recovered files and organize what needed to be rebuilt. Rosie slept on the couch wrapped in a blanket Carrie kept for cold evenings, and the apartment felt fuller than it ever had. By dawn, she had a plan. Brutal hours ahead, sleepless nights, and caffeine-fueled days, but a plan. Garrett kissed her forehead before he left, a gesture so natural that neither of them remarked on it. Get some rest when you can. You cannot design anything if you collapse. She did not collapse. She worked with a fury born of violation and survival. And when the deadline arrived 3 weeks later, she delivered a brand package that exceeded even her own expectations. Pacific Northwest Grills signed the contract with effusive praise. They mentioned recommending her to other businesses in their network. They said her work was the best they had seen. The victory was sweet, but incomplete. Kirk Pennington was still out there, still unpunished, still capable of destroying other people's livelihoods with his malice and his skills. Danny provided the resolution. He had documented the intrusion, meticulously collecting evidence of the remote access and tracing it back to an IP address that Kirk had been foolish enough not to disguise. The information went to a cybercrime reporting portal and to Kirk's current employer at a design firm that took intellectual property theft seriously. 2 weeks later, Carrie received word through professional channels that Kirk had been terminated. No public accusations, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet removal of a man who had tried to destroy her and failed. She did not celebrate, but she did feel something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety that had been tightening for months. The autumn that followed was golden in more than season. September brought school again, but this time Rosie faced it with Carrie's phone number in her backpack and the knowledge that someone would come if she called. The bullies had not returned, whether from the summer's distance or the fear Carrie had instilled, and Rosie bloomed in their absence. October brought a request that surprised her. A networking event for designers and clients hosted at a downtown gallery, and Carrie had been invited as a featured speaker after the Pacific Northwest Grill project gained attention in industry circles. She had avoided such events for years, the combination of crowds and professional scrutiny triggering every insecurity she carried. But something had shifted in the months since January, since a business card in a restaurant pocket, since pizza in a park with a widower and his daughter. She said yes. Garrett offered to accompany her. Rosie is staying with Wade that night. I could be there if you want support. The offer was tempting, but she shook her head. I need to do this myself, to prove I can. He understood, as he always seemed to understand the things she could not fully explain. The gallery was crowded and bright, filled with people who measured success in contracts and connections. Carrie wore a dress she had bought specifically for the occasion, deep blue and well-fitted, chosen not to hide her body, but to present it with confidence. Her presentation went well. Questions were intelligent and respectful. Business cards were exchanged with potential clients who seemed genuinely interested in her work. She was riding the high of accomplishment when she saw him. Spencer Caldwell stood near the wine bar, expensive suit and practiced smile, surrounded by the same aura of self-satisfaction he had worn that night at Higgins' restaurant. 9 months had passed, but his face was instantly recognizable, etched into her memory by humiliation. He saw her at the same moment. His expression flickered through surprise, recognition, and then something she had not expected. Amusement. He approached before she could retreat. Carolyn Wright? His voice was honeyed poison. I almost did not recognize you. You look different. The subtext was clear. Different, but still not good enough. Still not meeting his standards. She felt the old response rising, the urge to apologize and deflect and make herself small. But another voice rose with it, stronger and steadier. I am different. Her words came out calm, almost pleasant. I spent the last 9 months remembering what actually matters. Apparently you spent them practicing the same tired act. His smile faltered. Excuse me, you heard me? She did not raise her voice, did not make a scene, but something in her tone made the people nearby turn and listen. You sat across from me and explained that I was not good enough to be seen with. You thought you were stating facts. You were actually revealing your own limitations. Now I think you have the wrong idea. I have the exact right idea. She stepped closer and he stepped back, and the power dynamics shifted in that single movement. You measure people by what they can do for your image. That is not discernment. That is insecurity wearing a suit. His face flushed. You do not know anything about me. I know enough. And I know something about myself that I did not know 9 months ago. The opinions of small people do not determine my worth. They only reveal the size of the people holding them. She turned and walked away, and her legs did not tremble, and her heart beat strong and steady in her chest. Garrett was waiting when she got home despite her insistence that she did not need support. He sat on her doorstep with a thermos of coffee and a concerned expression that melted into pride when she told him what had happened. You really said that. I really said it. She sat beside him on the cold concrete. I do not know where it came from. Yes, you do. His hand found hers in the darkness. It came from you. It was always there. You just needed to stop believing the people who told you it was not. The kiss that followed was not their first. There had been others in recent weeks, tentative and questioning, testing the boundaries of what they were becoming. But this one was different. This one was an answer rather than a question. They sat on the doorstep until the cold drove them inside, and they talked until the talking became unnecessary. And when Carrie fell asleep that night, she felt for the first time that the future might contain something other than carefully managed disappointment. The intrusion came without warning. November 3rd, a Thursday evening, Carrie was at the house on Maple Street helping Rosie with a book report while Garrett prepared dinner. The doorbell rang, and Garrett wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. The woman on the porch was small and gray-haired and carried herself with the rigid posture of someone expecting a fight. Her eyes swept past Garrett and into the house, landing on Carrie with an expression of cold assessment. Carrie knew immediately who she was. The shape of her jaw, the color of her eyes, features she had seen in photographs and in the drawings of a daughter who did not want to forget. Dottie. Garrett's voice was carefully neutral. I was not expecting you. Clearly. The word dripped with judgment. She pushed past him into the house uninvited. I have been hearing interesting things, Garrett, about changes in my granddaughter's life that no one thought to mention to me. Rosie looked up from her homework, confusion and wariness fighting for dominance on her face. Grandma Dottie crossed the room and gathered Rosie into an embrace that was more possession than affection. My darling, my sweet girl, has your father been keeping secrets from me? The scene unfolded with the inevitability of a collision. Dottie's accusations delivered with the precision of someone who had rehearsed them. Garrett's defensive responses growing sharper as his patience eroded, and Carrie standing in the doorway of the kitchen, understanding with terrible clarity that she was the target of this attack. Who is she? Dottie's finger pointed like a weapon. Who is this woman in my daughter's home with my granddaughter, acting like she belongs here? Garrett stepped between them, a physical barrier against the verbal assault. Her name is Caroline. She is important to me. And to Rosie. Important. The word was a sneer. Laura has been gone for 3 years, and you have already replaced her. No one is replacing anyone. His voice rose. Laura wanted me to be happy. She wrote me a letter. A letter. Dottie laughed, but there was no humor in it. And this letter conveniently told you to move on with whatever woman crossed your path. Carrie found her voice. Mrs. Beckett, I understand that you are grieving. I am not trying to take your daughter's place. You do not understand anything. Dottie turned on her with sudden venom. You do not know what it is like to bury your child, to visit a grave where your daughter should be growing old. And now I come here and find a stranger in her home, with her husband, with her daughter, and I am supposed to accept this. She is not your daughter. Rosie's small voice cut through the storm. She is Carrie. She is my friend. The correction did not calm Dottie. It inflamed her as she rounded on Garrett with renewed fury. This is what you have taught her, to forget her mother, to call this woman her friend while Laura rots in the ground. Enough. Garrett's voice was stone. You will not speak about Laura that way, and you will not insult Carrie in my home. Your home. Dottie's eyes narrowed. We will see about that. I have spoken with an attorney, Garrett, about visitation rights, about custody arrangements. And I promise you, if you continue this relationship, I will pursue every legal option available to me. The threat landed like a blow. Carrie saw Garrett stagger under its weight, saw the calculation in his eyes as he assessed the seriousness of Dottie's words. You cannot. His voice was barely above a whisper. She is my daughter. She is Laura's daughter too. And Laura's mother has rights, especially when the father is making choices that may not be in the child's best interest. The standoff lasted an eternity, compressed into seconds. Then Dottie gathered her coat and her purse and her self-righteousness and swept toward the door. You have 1 week to think about this. Consider what you are willing to lose. The door closed behind her and the silence that followed was absolute. Rosie began to cry. Garrett gathered her up and carried her to the couch, murmuring reassurances that Carrie could not hear. And Carrie stood in the kitchen doorway, watching the family she had grown to love fracture under the weight of grief that refused to heal. The week that followed was a slow unraveling. Garrett withdrew, not completely, not dramatically, but in increments that Carrie recognized because she had performed the same retreat so many times herself. Phone calls went unanswered. Text messages received brief replies. The warmth that had grown between them cooled to something careful and distant. She understood. She hated it, but she understood. His daughter was his world, and anything that threatened that world had to be eliminated, even if the threat was only a woman who loved them both. Tuesday came without pizza night. Garrett texted an excuse about work, and Carrie sat alone in her apartment with Biscuit in the empty space where connection used to be. On Friday, Nicole called with news. Garrett had not been at work. His brother Wade had mentioned something about Seattle, about needing space, about decisions that had to be made. He left. Carrie's voice sounded strange to her own ears. He left without telling me. Nicole's response was gentle. Maybe he could not face telling you. Maybe he knew it would hurt too much. What am I supposed to do? Wait, pray, trust that whatever he is working through, he will come back. But the waiting was agony. 4 days passed without word. 4 days of checking her phone every few minutes, of jumping at every sound, of imagining scenarios that ranged from reconciliation to permanent loss. On the 5th day, her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end was small and trembling. Carrie, it is Rosie. Rosie, Carrie pressed the phone against her ear. Where are you? Are you okay? I am at Uncle Wade's house. The words tumbled out between sobs. Dad went to Seattle. He said he needed to think, but I found something I have to show you. Show me what the letter I wrote. To Grandma Dottie. I want you to read it before I send it. Carrie closed her eyes. You wrote a letter to your grandmother, I had to explain. Rosie's voice steadied slightly. She does not understand. She thinks you are taking Mom's place, but that is not what is happening. I need her to know. What does the letter say? Can you come over? I want to show you in person. The drive to Wade's house took 20 minutes. Carrie found Rosie waiting on the porch, a piece of notebook paper clutched in her hands. The girl's face was tear-streaked but determined. Read it. Carrie took the paper and began to read. Dear Grandma Dottie, I am Rosie, your granddaughter. I know you miss Mom. I miss her too. I draw pictures of her every week so I do not forget what she looks like. But Grandma Carrie is not replacing Mom. Nobody can replace Mom. Carrie is different. She protected me when kids at school were being mean. She taught me that being sad does not mean being weak. She makes pancakes with blueberries because I like them, not because she is trying to be Mom. Mom used to say that hearts do not get smaller when you love more people. Hearts grow. That is what mine is doing. I love Mom, I love you, and I love Carrie. That is not wrong. Please do not make Dad choose. He is scared of losing me, and when he is scared, he runs away. Like he did when Mom died. He came back then, and he will come back now, but only if you stop making him afraid. I do not want to lose anyone else. Not Dad, not you, not Carrie. Please understand. Love, Rosie. P.S. Carrie's dad left when she was little, like mine did not. She knows what it is like to lose someone. She would never make me feel that way on purpose. Carrie looked up from the letter with tears running down her face. Rosie, this is beautiful. Will it work? Will Grandma understand? I do not know. Carrie knelt and gathered the girl into her arms. But I know that whatever happens, you have said something important, something true. They stayed like that for a long moment, two people holding on to each other in the uncertainty of waiting. Then Wade appeared in the doorway and offered to make hot chocolate, and the evening passed in the peculiar comfort of found family gathered against the storm. Carrie took a copy of the letter home. She read it again before bed and again in the morning, and each time the words struck her with fresh force. Hearts do not get smaller when you love more people. Hearts grow. Out of the mouths of children came the wisdom that adults spent lifetimes failing to learn. She folded the paper and placed it in her bedside drawer beside the business card that had started everything, and she waited for whatever would come next. The remaining days passed like stones dropping into deep water. Carrie went through the motions of her life, completing projects and feeding her cat, and responding to Nicole's worried texts with assurances she did not feel. Rosie sent the letter. Wade confirmed it when Carrie called to check. The envelope had gone out addressed to Dottie's house in Lake Oswego, carrying its cargo of childhood truth toward a woman who might receive it as peace offering or provocation. There was nothing to do but wait. On the sixth day, Carrie's phone rang again. This time the number was familiar. Garrett's voice was hoarse like a man who had not slept. "Carrie, you left." The words came out sharper than she intended. "You left without a word. I know. I am sorry. I was scared. I was scared too. And I was still here." Silence stretched across the cellular connection. "Dottie called me," he said finally. "She got Rosie's letter. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her." "What did she say?" "She said she had been wrong. That she was letting her grief turn her into someone Laura would not recognize." He paused. "She is withdrawing the legal threats. All of them." Relief flooded through Carrie so intensely that her knees buckled. She sat down hard on the edge of her bed. "That is good. That is really good." "Carrie," his voice cracked, "I love you. I have loved you since the night you sang along to the radio with Rosie, even though you did not know the words. I have loved you through every pizza and every Sunday and every moment of watching you become part of our family. You hurt me, Garrett. The truth demanded speaking. You ran when things got hard. I know, and I am asking you to forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because I am promising to stay, to fight, to never run again." She closed her eyes and let his words settle into the places where fear had taken root. Promises were fragile things. People broke them every day. But Garrett had shown her who he was across months of ordinary moments, and that evidence weighed heavier than the single failure of a frightened week. "Come home," she said. "We have a lot to talk about. I am already on the highway. I will be there in 3 hours." She spent those 3 hours cleaning her apartment and preparing what she would say. But when his truck pulled into the parking lot and he walked toward her door with his face full of hope and exhaustion and love, her prepared words evaporated. He stood in her doorway and she stood in the threshold, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had worked through in the days apart. "I read Laura's letter again while I was in Seattle. The whole thing. And there was a line I had missed before, or maybe I had not been ready to hear it." "What line?" She wrote that being alone is not the same as being loyal. That the best way to honor our love was to keep loving, not to stop. Carrie felt something crack open in her chest. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, and his arms came up to hold her, and they stood in the doorway while the Portland evening dimmed around them. "I am not going anywhere," he murmured against her hair. "I know I have to prove that. I know trust has to be rebuilt. But I am not going anywhere." "I know." Her voice was muffled against his shoulder. "I believe you." They stayed like that until the neighbors started glancing curiously, and the evening chill drove them inside. And when Carrie closed the door behind them, she felt for the first time that the closing was not protection, but welcome, not hiding, but homecoming. Mom. The meeting with Dottie was scheduled for the Sunday before Thanksgiving. Neutral ground, Garrett suggested, and they chose a coffee shop in Lake Oswego that neither family frequented, a place without memories or territorial claims. Carrie dressed with care that morning, not to impress, but to armor. A charcoal sweater that felt like confidence. Jeans that fit well. Earrings Nicole had given her for her 30th birthday, small silver studs that caught the light. She looked at herself in the bathroom mirror and saw someone she was still learning to recognize, someone who stood straight and met her own eyes without flinching. Garrett picked her up at 10. Rosie was staying with Wade for the morning, a deliberate choice to keep the conversation between adults. The drive to Lake Oswego passed in comfortable silence, his hand occasionally finding hers across the center console, a wordless reassurance that they were facing this together. The coffee shop was half empty. Sunday morning crowds still sleeping off Saturday nights. Dottie sat at a corner table, her posture rigid, her hands wrapped around a cup she had not touched. She looked older than Carrie remembered from the confrontation at the house, the sharpness of her anger replaced by something more fragile. They ordered drinks and sat across from her, the table a demilitarized zone between past and future. Dottie spoke first. I owe you both an apology. The words seemed to cost her. I said things that were cruel and untrue, and I made threats I had no right to make. Garrett leaned forward. What changed Rosie's letter? Dottie's voice cracked. She wrote about hearts growing instead of shrinking. About how loving new people does not mean forgetting old ones. She paused, gathering herself. Laura used to say the same thing. I heard my daughter's words coming from my granddaughter's pen, and I realized I had been betraying everything Laura believed in. Carrie listened without interrupting, sensing that Dottie needed to complete this confession before any response could land. I was so angry when Laura died. The older woman's eyes glistened, angry at the cancer, angry at God, angry at myself for all the years I wasted being disappointed that she married a carpenter instead of a professional. I never told her I was proud of her. I never told her that Garrett was exactly the kind of man she deserved. And then she was gone, and all that unspoken love curdled into something ugly. She looked directly at Carrie for the first time. When I saw you in her house with her family, I felt like I was losing her all over again. Like someone was erasing the few traces of her that remained. I understand that fear. Carrie's voice was gentle but firm. I have spent most of my life feeling like I was not enough, like I did not belong anywhere. But I have learned something in the past year that I think you need to hear. Dottie waited. The people who love us do not want us to stop living when they are gone. They want us to carry their love forward, to let it multiply instead of hoarding it like a finite resource. Carrie reached across the table and placed her hand near Dottie's, not touching, but offering. Laura's love is in Rosie, in Garrett, in the furniture he builds, in the drawings Rosie creates, in the traditions they have kept alive. I am not here to replace any of that. I am here to add to it. The silence that followed was thick with decades of grief and months of hostility. Then Dottie's hand moved, crossing the remaining distance, her fingers wrapping around Carrie's with surprising strength. I have been so alone since she died. The admission broke something open. My husband passed 2 years before Laura. My other daughter lives in Boston and rarely calls. Garrett and Rosie were all I had left, and instead of holding them close, I pushed them away with my fear. Garrett spoke. You are still their grandmother. That has not changed. But I almost destroyed it. Dottie shook her head. I almost drove you away with lawyers and threats. What kind of grandmother does that? One who was drowning in grief. Carrie squeezed her hand. Grief makes people do terrible things. It does not have to be the final word. The conversation continued for 2 hours, moving through territory that had been mined with resentment and planting seeds of something new. By the time they left the coffee shop, no grand reconciliation had occurred, but the groundwork had been laid. Dottie would come to Thanksgiving dinner. She would try to see Carrie as an addition rather than a replacement. She would work on letting go of the anger that had poisoned her relationship with the family she had left. It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. Thanksgiving arrived with its chaos of preparation and its particular brand of exhaustion. Carrie found herself in Garrett's kitchen at 6 in the morning, wrestling with a turkey that seemed determined to resist her efforts. Rosie appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Are you cooking the turkey? I am trying. Carrie pushed hair out of her face with her forearm. It is fighting back. Mom used to talk to it. Rosie climbed onto a stool by the counter. She said, you have to thank the turkey for giving its life so we can eat. Then it cooperates. Carrie looked at the raw bird with new eyes. She felt foolish, but she also felt the weight of tradition being passed down, Laura's wisdom, traveling through her daughter to the woman who was learning to fill empty spaces. Thank you, turkey. I appreciate your sacrifice. Rosie giggled. You have to mean it. I do mean it. Carrie smiled. See, it is cooperating now. The turkey was not actually cooperating, but the moment was, and by the time Garrett emerged from the shower with wet hair and a questioning expression, Carrie and Rosie had the bird in the oven and the side dishes underway. Dottie arrived at noon bearing a pie she had made herself and an expression of determined pleasantness. The first hour was awkward conversations, stilted by the presence of unresolved tension. But Rosie, with the social genius of children who refused to acknowledge adult discomfort, kept pulling her grandmother into activities. Help me set the table. Come see my new drawings. Tell Carrie about the time Mom tried to make bread and it exploded. The bread story broke the ice. Dottie laughed for the first time, a genuine sound that transformed her face, and suddenly she was telling other stories. Memories of Laura that Garrett had never heard, pieces of his wife that her mother had been hoarding alone. Carrie listened and asked questions and offered her own stories of kitchen disasters, and by the time the turkey was carved and the table was full, something had shifted. Not a complete healing, but a turn in the tide. After dinner, while Rosie showed Dottie her room and Garrett cleaned the kitchen, Carrie stepped onto the back porch and let the November cold clear her head. The sky was darkening, early stars beginning to emerge above the city lights, and she thought about the year that was ending and the year that was beginning and all the unexpected turns that had brought her here. Garrett joined her, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands. Warm peace offering. She accepted the mug and leaned against his shoulder. Today went better than I expected. Dottie is trying. He wrapped an arm around her. That is more than I hoped for. Do you think she will ever really accept me? He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I think she is starting to see what Rosie sees. What I see, that you are not taking anything away. You are making us more. They stood in the cold until the coffee grew lukewarm, and then they went back inside to their family, imperfect and healing, and somehow against all odds theirs. December brought decisions. Carrie's career had reached a crossroads, the success of the Pacific Northwest Grill project generating more opportunities than she could handle alone. She found herself turning down contracts, working until midnight, sacrificing the relationships she had fought so hard to build. Something has to change. She sat at her desk, surrounded by project files, the words escaping as a sigh. I cannot keep doing this. Garrett looked up from the chair where he was reading Rosie asleep against his shoulder after a late movie night. What are you thinking I do not know? Carrie rubbed her eyes. I spent years building this business, proving I could succeed on my own. But now that I have people I want to be present for, the business feels like a trap. Maybe it does not have to be. His voice was thoughtful. What if you brought on partners or focused on fewer, bigger projects? The suggestion planted a seed. Over the following weeks, Carrie explored options, talking to contacts in the design world, researching business structures that would allow her to maintain quality while reducing volume. By the new year, she had a plan. A small studio with 2 junior designers. She would train selective clients who valued her approach and strict boundaries around her time. The change was terrifying. It meant trusting others with her reputation, accepting that she could not control everything, letting go of the independence that had been both refuge and prison. But when she signed the lease on a small office space and interviewed candidates for her team, she felt something she had not expected. Relief. The weight of proving herself was finally lifting, replaced by the lighter burden of building something sustainable. Garrett faced his own crossroads. The demand for his furniture had outpaced his capacity, and he was spending more hours in the workshop and fewer with the people he loved. The solution came from an unexpected source. Wade's son Danny, fresh from his triumph recovering Carrie's files, had been talking to his friends about Garrett's work. 2 of them, recent graduates from a local trade program, showed up at the workshop one Saturday asking if Garrett needed apprentices. They were young and eager and completely untrained in his particular methods. Taking them on would mean slowing down teaching instead of producing, trusting others with the craft his father had passed to him. He said yes. The first months were frustrating, pieces ruined by inexperience, projects delayed by the learning curve. But gradually the apprentices improved, and Garrett found himself rediscovering the joy of his work through their fresh eyes. He was not just making furniture anymore. He was passing down a tradition, ensuring that the skills his grandfather had taught his father would survive another generation. Valentine's Day fell on a Tuesday, which meant pizza night coincided with romance. Garrett arrived at the park with the usual box from Enzo's and a small velvet pouch that he tucked into his jacket pocket when Carrie was not looking. Rosie was in on the secret, barely containing her excitement, her eyes darting between her father and Carrie with conspiratorial glee. Why are you looking at me like that? Carrie narrowed her eyes at the girl, like what Rosie's innocence was transparently false. I am not looking at you like anything. You are the worst liar I have ever met. I learned it from Dad. He always looks guilty when he is hiding presents. Garrett intervened before his daughter could completely ruin the surprise. "Rosie, why do you not go play on the swings for a few minutes? I need to talk to Carrie." The girl sprinted away, turning every few seconds to check if she was missing anything. Garrett turned to Carrie, his expression shifting from playful to serious. "I want to give you something. It is not my birthday. I know." He reached into his pocket and withdrew the velvet pouch. "I made this. For you." Inside was a ring. Not an engagement ring, he clarified quickly, but a promise. A band of cherry wood inlaid with a thin line of silver polished until it gleamed. The craftsmanship was exquisite, every detail perfect. "This is the wood from the first piece of furniture I made after Laura died." His voice was quiet. "A jewelry box that I kept because I could not bear to sell it. I wanted you to have something that connects my past to our future." Carrie slipped the ring onto her finger. The fit was perfect. He had measured her, somehow noticed the size of her hands, applied his carpenter's precision to this act of love. "I do not have words." Her eyes were wet. "You do not need words." He took her hand, the ring warm between their palms. "You just need to wear it, and know that wherever we go from here, we go together." Rosie could no longer contain herself. She came running back, breathless with anticipation. Did she cry? "Dad said you would cry. I am not crying." Carrie wiped her eyes. "I am experiencing moisture." "That is crying." Rosie threw her arms around both of them. "This is the best Valentine's Day ever." They ate cold pizza on the park bench while the February dark settled around them, and Carrie kept touching the ring, turning it on her finger, marveling at the reality of being chosen by someone who saw her clearly and loved her anyway. The proposal came in March, 14 months after a business card appeared in her coat pocket. Carrie did not expect it. They had talked about the future in abstract terms, had acknowledged that their relationship was heading somewhere permanent, but she had assumed they would arrive gradually through conversations and compromises, not through grand gestures. She underestimated Garrett's capacity for surprises. The conspiracy began weeks before whispered conversations between Rosie and her father, unusual phone calls from Wade, unexplained absences that Garrett attributed to client meetings. Carrie noticed the signs but dismissed them, too focused on her new studio and the challenges of training her junior designers. The Tuesday arrived without fanfare. Carrie drove to Laurelhurst Park expecting the usual ritual pizza and conversation, the comfortable rhythm they had established over a year of weekly gatherings. What she found was something else entirely. The bench near the maple trees had been transformed. Strings of lights wound through the branches overhead, their glow soft against the spring dusk. Candles in glass jars lined the path, and gathered around the bench were the people who mattered. Rosie, in a dress she had clearly chosen herself, Wade and his sons Dottie with a handkerchief already in hand, Nicole and Owen and Beverly, who had flown from Denver without telling her daughter. Carrie stopped at the edge of the lights, her heart hammering against her ribs. "What is happening?" Garrett stepped forward. He wore a button-down shirt instead of his usual flannel, his hair freshly cut, his eyes holding an intensity she had not seen before. 14 months ago, I left a business card in a stranger's pocket." He took her hands in his. "I did not know if you would come. I did not know if you would stay. All I knew was that someone needed to tell you that you were worth more than the way that man treated you." She could not speak. The words were lodged somewhere beneath her sternum. "You came. You stayed. You became the person Rosie runs to when she needs comfort, and the person I think about first thing in the morning and last thing at night. You made our broken little family whole again, not by replacing what we lost, but by adding something new." Rosie bounced on her heels. "Dad, do the thing. Do it now." Garrett laughed, and the tension broke just enough for Carrie to breathe. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a box, small and velvet and unmistakable. When he opened it, she saw the ring. Not the wooden band he had given her in February, but something new. A delicate setting with an emerald the color of her eyes, flanked by two small diamonds that caught the candlelight. Carolyn Whitmore. He lowered himself to one knee, and the watching crowd held its collective breath. "Will you eat pizza with us every Tuesday, every week, every year, for the rest of your life?" The question was absurd and perfect, and so entirely Garrett, that she laughed through her tears. She looked at Rosie, who was practically vibrating with excitement, at Dottie, who was already crying, at her mother, who had come all this way without being asked. Yes, the word came out strong and clear. 1,000 times yes. He slid the ring onto her finger beside the wooden band that had never left her hand, and stood to kiss her while their families cheered and Rosie declared that she had never been so happy in her entire life. The celebration continued at the house, champagne and pizza, and stories exchanged between people who were becoming against all obstacles a single family. Carrie found herself in the kitchen with Beverly washing dishes while the party continued in the living room. I should have come sooner. Her mother's voice was hesitant. I should have met him before this. You came when it mattered. I have not been a good mother. Beverly set down the dish she was drying. I spent your whole childhood telling you all the ways you needed to change. I thought I was helping. I thought if I could make you better, you would not have to suffer the way I did. Carrie turned from the sink. What do you mean my mother did the same to me? The confession came slowly. Made me believe I was never thin enough, pretty enough, good enough. And when your father left, I was so angry that he proved her right. I took that anger out on you. The words opened a door that had been locked for decades. Carrie saw her mother differently, not as the source of her insecurities, but as another victim of the same patterns, another woman who had been taught to measure her worth by the wrong scales. I forgive you. The words surprised them both. I do not think I knew that until I said it, but I do. I forgive you. Beverly's tears fell freely now. You should not have to. I do not deserve it. Forgiveness is not about deserving. Carrie took her mother's hands. It is about choosing not to carry the weight anymore. They stood in the kitchen, two women who had spent 30 years failing to understand each other, and something healed that neither had expected to mend. The wedding was set for June at Laurelhurst Park in the same spot where everything had begun. Carrie wanted simplicity. Garrett wanted meaning. Rosie wanted a flower girl dress that spun when she twirled. They found compromises that satisfied everyone. The guest list was small, 30 people who had earned their place through presence and love. Nicole served as maid of honor, her toast full of affectionate mockery and genuine emotion. Wade stood as best man, his speech brief and heartfelt, his pride in his brother evident in every word. Rosie walked down the aisle first, scattering petals with more enthusiasm than precision, her dress performing exactly as promised when she spun at the end to show it off. The crowd laughed, and the laughter cleared the way for what came next. Carrie wore white, but not the traditional gown her mother had envisioned. A simple dress that moved when she walked, elegant without being formal. Her hair was down the way Garrett preferred it. The wooden ring stayed on her finger, joined now by the engagement ring and soon by a wedding band. Garrett waited at the altar, if a decorated park bench could be called an altar, his expression the same mix of hope and certainty it had carried the first night she saw him across a restaurant. He had not changed, she realized. He was still the man who left business cards for crying strangers, who built furniture that lasted generations, who loved his daughter with a fierceness that left no room for doubt. What had changed was her. She walked toward him without apology, without the urge to make herself smaller, without the voice in her head cataloging her flaws. She walked toward him as the person she had become, shaped by his kindness and Rosie's acceptance, and the slow, steady work of learning to see herself through gentler eyes. The ceremony was brief. They had written their own vows, exchanged in voices that carried to the gathered witnesses. Garrett went first. Carrie, a carpenter, measures twice and cuts once. That is the rule. You make sure before you commit, because some things cannot be undone. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. But with you, I did not need to measure. I knew from the beginning that you were the one I wanted to build a life with. Not because you are perfect, because you are real, because you show up even when it is hard, because you love my daughter as fiercely as I do. I promise to keep showing up for you every day for as long as we have. Then Carrie. Garrett, I spent my whole life believing I was too much of some things and not enough of others. Too heavy, too sensitive, not pretty enough, not confident enough. You never tried to change me. You never looked at me like I needed fixing. You just looked at me, and somehow that was enough to help me see myself differently. I promise to keep looking at you the same way, to see the man you are not the man you think you should be, to build something with you that is stronger because we know what it means to be broken. The rings were exchanged. The kiss was long enough to make Rosie cover her eyes. And when the officiant pronounced them married, the cheer that rose from 30 voices sounded like the beginning of something new. The reception lasted until dark, dancing on grass and toasts under string lights. Laura's photograph sat on a table near the cake, included at Carrie's insistence. She is part of this, Carrie had said when she placed it there. She made them who they are. She deserves to be present. Dottie found Carrie near the photo later when the dancing had wound down and the guests were beginning to drift toward their cars. The older woman stood silently for a moment, studying her daughter's image. "She would have liked you." The words were soft. "I know I said terrible things before, but I know my daughter and she would have seen in you what Garrett sees, what Rosie sees." "Thank you." Carrie's voice was equally quiet. "That means more than you know." Dottie turned to face her. "I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one thing. What is that? That this family needed someone to bring it back to life. I just thought that someone should be Laura. I could not see that it was meant to be you." They embraced two women who had started as adversaries and arrived at something closer to kinship. When they separated, Dottie patted Carrie's cheek with surprising tenderness and rejoined the thinning crowd. Garrett appeared at Carrie's side, his jacket discarded, his sleeves rolled up. "My wife." The word was new and strange and perfect. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." She leaned into him. "Your wife likes the sound of that very much." They stayed until the cleanup crew arrived, reluctant to leave the scene of their transformation. Then they drove to a rented cabin in the Columbia River Gorge, where they would spend a week being newlyweds before returning to the life they had built. Rosie stayed with Wade, already planning the stories she would tell her class about the wedding. Biscuit stayed with Nicole, tolerating the indignity because the alternative was a kennel. The house on Maple Street sat empty, waiting for its new family to return. The year that followed was the kind of year that feels ordinary while it is happening and extraordinary in retrospect. Carrie's studio grew, her junior designers becoming skilled enough to handle projects independently. Garrett's apprentices mastered their craft, producing work that carried his standards into new hands. Rosie finished third grade and started Fourth, the Bullies, a distant memory, her confidence blooming in their absence. Pizza nights continued, expanded now to include whoever needed a seat at the table. Dottie became a regular, her initial awkwardness fading into genuine participation. Beverly visited twice each trip, revealing a different woman than the one Carrie had grown up with, softer and more willing to admit mistakes. The family was not perfect. There were arguments about household chores and disagreements about parenting and the ordinary friction of lives lived in close proximity. But beneath the friction was bedrock, solid and unyielding, the foundation they had built through crisis and choice. Spring returned with cherry blossoms and the anniversary of everything that mattered. Carrie marked the dates quietly in her calendar: the night at Higgins' restaurant, the first pizza night, the Saturday at the house that changed everything. Each milestone was a reminder of how far she had traveled, from the woman crying in a bathroom, how much she had gained by taking a chance on a business card from a stranger. The nursery took shape in the room that had been a guest bedroom, rarely used and cluttered with things no one needed. Garrett built the furniture himself, a crib that matched the rocking chair, that matched the changing table, and crafted from the same walnut wood, all featuring the small carved bee that had become his signature. "Why bees?" Carrie asked one evening, watching him sand the final spindle of the crib. He paused, considering the question. "Laura loved them. She said they proved that small things could do important work. That one bee did not change much, but a whole hive could pollinate a field. So you put bees on everything." "I put bees on things I want to last." He met her eyes. "The things that matter." The pregnancy had been a surprise discovered on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after their first anniversary. Carrie had woken early, nausea pulling her from sleep with unfamiliar urgency. She made it to the bathroom before the worst of it hit, kneeling on cold tile while her body rejected whatever had disagreed with it. The test confirmed what her body had been telling her. 2 lines, unmistakable life asserting itself in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She had hidden the test in her drawer and saved the news for the right moment, which came that same anniversary morning when Garrett presented her with a jewelry box carved with cherry blossoms and a tiny bumblebee. "Happy anniversary." His voice was warm. "I started it the week after we got engaged. It took me a year to get the details right." She opened the box. Inside, on velvet lining, was a handwritten note in Garrett's careful script. "For all the precious things we will collect together. I have something for you too." She reached into her pocket and withdrew an envelope containing the ultrasound photograph, black and white and grainy, showing a small bean-shaped form surrounded by darkness. For a moment he did not move, did not speak, did not breathe. Then his eyes found hers, and the question in them was answered by the smile she could not contain. "We are having a baby," Rosie screamed with joy. Garrett pulled Carrie into his arms and held her while his body shook with silent tears. The kitchen filled with laughter and plans and the particular chaos of happiness arriving without warning. Rosie appointed herself assistant baby planner, researching names and nursery themes in the developmental stages of fetuses with the thoroughness she usually reserved for book reports. Dad says the baby will have your eyes. Rosie studied Carrie's face with scientific intensity. I hope so. Green eyes are special. Blue eyes are special too, I know. Rosie nodded sagely. But we already have blue eyes in this family. Green would add variety. Benjamin Wade Beckett arrived on a Tuesday in December, because of course he did. Tuesday had been their day since the beginning, and the baby apparently wanted to honor the tradition. He was small and red and impossibly perfect, and when the nurse placed him on Carrie's chest, she felt something shift in the architecture of her soul. Hello, her voice was barely a whisper. I have been waiting for you. Rosie met her brother on the second day approaching the hospital room with unusual hesitation. She had planned for it, but the reality of a new sibling was different from the anticipation. Carrie watched her stepdaughter's face as she looked at the baby, watched the uncertainty transform into wonder. He is so small. He will get bigger. Can I hold him? Carrie showed her how supporting the head, keeping the body secure. Rosie sat very still, barely breathing, as Benjamin slept in her arms. I am going to teach him everything. Her voice was solemn. How to draw and how to read and how to make Dad laugh. And I am going to protect him, like Carrie protects me. The word struck Carrie with unexpected force. She had not thought of herself as a protector, had not recognized the role she had assumed. But Rosie was right. She had stood between the girl, and cruelty had fought battles that were not hers by birth, had earned a place in this family through action rather than blood. You are going to be an amazing big sister, I know. Rosie's confidence had returned. I am going to be the best. Spring arrived again with cherry blossoms and the anniversary of the proposal. Benjamin was 4 months old, smiling freely now, beginning to notice the world beyond his immediate needs. Carrie strapped him into the carrier against her chest and walked to Laurelhurst Park, retracing the path she had walked so many times over the past 2 years. The bench near the maple trees was occupied by a young couple sharing a sandwich. She sat on a nearby one, adjusting the carrier so Benjamin could see the trees and let herself remember. A business card in a coat pocket. A choice to show up despite fear. A year of Tuesdays that had transformed her life. I met your father here, she told Benjamin, though he was too young to understand. He offered me pizza and his daughter and absolutely nothing else. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. Benjamin gurgled, which she chose to interpret as agreement. You are going to have a good life. Her voice was soft, meant only for him. You are going to have a father who builds things that last, and a sister who will fight for you, and a mother who finally learned that she was worth something. You are going to know what it feels like to be loved without conditions. The baby reached for a drifting blossom, his fingers grasping at beauty he could not yet understand. Carrie watched him and felt the truth of everything she had survived settle into peace. The story had never been about finding someone to complete her. She had been complete all along, carrying potential that circumstance and cruelty had hidden. The story was about learning to see herself clearly, about choosing connection over protection, about accepting that vulnerability was not the same as weakness. She thought about the woman who had cried in a restaurant bathroom, who had believed she was not enough, who had built walls so high she could not see over them. That woman was still part of her, would always be part of her, but she was no longer in charge. Enough was about showing up, about staying, about choosing again and again to reach toward connection instead of retreating into safety. She was enough. She had always been enough. She just needed the right people to help her see it. And if you asked her to name the moment when everything changed, the moment when she became the person she was meant to be, she would not point to the wedding or the pregnancy or any of the obvious milestones. She would point to a January evening in a restaurant bathroom when a woman who believed she was worthless found a business card in her pocket and chose to believe that maybe, just maybe, she deserved to be seen. That choice made everything else possible. And in the end, that was enough.